Okay, I know I said I'd vlog about alternate universes next, and I will. That's the next thing that actually is on the agenda, but I'm super excited about this. It's a challenge that's going around in the writing community. I found out about it from Jenna Morassi, whose channel I will be linking in the description so you can see her answers to these. Since it's coming up on Halloween, there is a challenge going around to answer 10 questions about your characters in your work in progress. In my case, it'd be two works. Answering questions about how they would interact with Halloween. There's two rules. First, give as brief of a description of your novel as possible. I will do my best. I'm using two novels, Fire Prometheus and From Hephaestus's Forge, both of which are sequels, or, well, Hephaestus is a sequel to Pandora's Box, which was the first novel in my giant AU universe that I will be referring back to quite a bit. Prometheus is kind of a companion novel. Since Pandora's Box and Hephaestus's Forge are both written from first-person point of view, there's about half the story that they're missing, which is covered in Fire Prometheus by Roy Mustang, who's the head of the other major part of the story going on. So I'm going to be trying to talk about two of them. Hephaestus follows Ed after he sinks part of Central in an attempt to save the rest of the country from Dante and Bradley. He goes down to Mistress's southern neighbor, a country called Erugo, and I probably mispronounced that. It is a canon country, but the only thing we know about it is that it's there. He goes to the capital called Haloa, which I made up, which I made the central hub for the human trafficking industry on the continent. Hephaestus follows him there, spending most of his time trying to destroy as much of the industry as possible, which is kind of the fire that no matter how much you piss on it, it's going to keep burning. Along the way, he ends up interacting with a cast of characters who are in one way or another part of the system down there and assist him in taking down who is the main, uh, I guess you could call her the leader of the industry. She's in charge of most of the business. And the first three quarters of the book really follow him while he's there, so there's very little to do with his life back in Amestris, and therefore very little to do with characters from the original canon. But the last quarter of the book involves Al coming down to Haloa and basically dragging Ed home to the family that Ed hadn't realized he'd put together. At that point, Ed has to focus on being able to interact with a family that's not quite as fucked up as the group he was working with down in Haloa. Fire of Prometheus, like I said, is Roy's side of the story. I know that sounds like I'm kind of pulling what E.L. James tried to do with the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy by having rewritten the trilogy from Christian's point of view. But first of all, I was doing it first. Second of all, the reason I'm doing it is because while there's some overlapping scenes between Ed and Roy, there's a lot that's not overlapping. In fact, if you read Pandora's Box, and that was the only thing I'd written in this universe, you would be actually pretty confused because there's a lot of stuff going on that Ed doesn't see, and when he sees the results of it, he has no idea how that happened, so he can't convey that to the audience, which leaves some questions for the audience. So Prometheus kind of follows Roy's side of the story on that, and then how he helps pick up the pieces of the country after Ed leaves the country, because he kind of left the country without any ruling faction. So a good portion of Prometheus, Ed's not even in the country. The second rule is you cannot use the same character to answer more than 3 of these 10 questions, just to try and keep it mixed up a little. Question 1. It's Halloween night. What is your protagonist dressed up as? Since I have 2 stories and they're both from first person point of view, I don't have any choice but to use Ed and Roy. Ed is probably dressed in whatever will let him blend in the most. He's got a reputation that can sometimes hinder him, sometimes help him, but after having spent time up in guerrilla territory in the northern de facto war going on back in Pandora's box. He has become the kind that he'll case a situation before he'll walk into it, so he tries to blend in as much as he can until he figures out what's going on, so that he knows if it's beneficial for him to throw off the costume or if he should keep his head ducked down. Roy, I'm not sure, but I like the idea of someone convincing him to dress up as a matchstick. He wouldn't do it, but it's a funny mental image. Number 2. Who in your cast refuses to dress up and shows up at the Halloween party without a costume? Nat. Nat is one of the various full metals in Haloa, a lot of the mercenary community that actively fights against the human trafficking industry started using the name Full Metal, so to try and confuse the person in charge of the industry and make it harder for them to be tracked, give them more freedom to work. And of all the full metals that get named or at least specified beyond, yeah, they're there and they go by that name, it's a toss-up between her and the Ishbalan full metal as to who has the least sense of humor. Number 3. Which character wears the most outrageous costume and what would it be? In Jenna Morassi's video where I got these questions from, she defines outrageous as the most sexy, which I think should actually be the sexiest, and the most scandalous. But let's be real, in either Hephaestus or Prometheus, outrageous would be the wildest, the one that stands out the most, the craziest one. And that would be Hughes, hands down. Knowing Hughes, he'd dress up as a giant camera, or he'd dress up as a giant photo book, all for the sake of having an excuse to show off more pictures of his wife and daughter. Of course, Roy would comment that the whole point of a costume party is to dress in a costume, and Hughes is kind of already a giant walking camera or photo book or both for his wife and daughter. Hughes has a thing about showing off their pictures. Number 4. On Halloween, werewolves, vampires, and zombies are on the prowl. Which of your characters get caught in their clutches and what do they turn into? This one was a little harder for me to answer because most of the characters I write are pretty cautious because they're either military or they're in the mercenary community or they were actually an abuse victim and therefore they're kind of careful about who they come close to. But I finally had to decide on Havelock because knowing that poor man's luck, he would get seduced by a vampiress without realizing she was a vampire and think he's going to score and then have his neck bitten and he's turned into a vampire. Honestly, I think he'd probably like it if it got him more dates. Who wins the contest for best costume? Sloth / Trisha, hands down. Her unique body chemistry as a homunculus kind of gives her an advantage. It lets her take on some truly terrifying forms. And you wouldn't expect the quiet housewife to do that, but it's always the quiet ones. Number 6. Who hands out toothbrushes to the trick-or-treaters? Alex Louis Armstrong. Not because he's a stick in the mud, but because he's just so enthusiastic about taking care of people. He is a fantastic person, and he's so enthusiastic about everything. He's the kind that he would just throw all sorts of candy at the children and then follow it up with toothbrushes and explain how to properly take care of their teeth in the proud tradition of the Armstrong family passed down over generations. Number 7. Which two of your characters decide to pair up and do an angel-devil costume together? Al would talk Ed into this. Ed would probably go along with it a lot easier than he'd pretend to because it's something he'd be doing with his brother after several years of not seeing him. Ed would not let Al be anything but the angel in that situation. And Ed would be the devil not just because he wouldn't let Al be the devil, but because even before he started turning feral from the abuse he suffered as a child, he was always the brother that was the bad influence. and kind of proud of it. Number 8. Someone is too scared to even attend the Halloween party. Who is it? Riza Hawkeye. Partway through Pandora's box, she had a nervous breakdown off screen, and Prometheus goes into what happened that really triggered it and how she acted where Ed wasn't seen and throughout the course of while Ed's down in Erugo. Uh, the breakdown made her something of a recluse, definitely made her a little more timid, a little jumpier. So being around that many people would be a little overwhelming at that point. But if Roy and or Ed went, she would go fully armed, because even though she's not really comfortable with crowds or even necessarily with her guns anymore, she takes protecting those two extremely seriously, to the point that she will do something detrimental to her health to keep them safe, which is actually what caused her nervous breakdown in the first place. Number 9. Who overdoses on Halloween candy and ends up sick? Harv, without a question. That man has no self-control. Although Ed is very proud of him for sticking to his promise to quit cigarettes. So, there's that. Number 10. Which character would most likely place a curse or hex on someone, and who would they curse? This one's a little harder to answer. My first thought is Anna, because she's even more rabid than Ed is about destroying the human trafficking industry, especially the child sex industry. She was even more of a victim than Ed ever was, and she, while she's only 14, has absolutely no problem torturing a child molester to the point that they die from the pain and not even from whatever else she's doing to them. But that kind of ignores the cast back in Amestris. It's a toss-up as to who would get to do this first, Roy or Trisha. Who would curse or hex Archer, who was uh, Ed's abuser when he was younger in the military? Mama and Papa would give Anna a run for her money as to who gets to whom faster. And I'm not sure which one would beat the other in the case of Roy and Trisha. She's Mama, but he's been invested the last several years where Trisha was not even able to be on screen. So, yeah, they would be arguing over who gets to Archer first. And speaking of Archer, I still haven't decided how that piece of shit dies. So those are the 10 questions for the All Hallows Right tag. Go ahead and tag whoever you want. If you do this as a blog post instead of a video, please use the hashtag AllHallowsWrite. That's All Hallows, HALLOWS, Write, WRITE. If you do a video, use that hashtag in whatever page of Twitter you link to the video in. Let's spread the word. Tag someone if you want. Don't tag anyone, just say, anyone can do it. I am tagging Zan, my beloved wife, whose channel I am also listing in the description and actually do in every video. So go check her out. She says she will be doing this possibly as a video. So hopefully she will have something up to see after she comes back from Washington, D.C. So, with that, I'm going to film the next video. Bye!